All right, so we're good, right? No gut or anything. My hair is okay. All right, welcome, and Brian Salter here, and today I have a very interesting subject. You guys tell me if I'm out of the camera or anything, all right? Okay, today we are going to talk about the dangers of magnetism. Now, that may sound silly to you, but I got a story. I got another story to tell you. I'm sorry, but my nose is running because I ate a corn dog. It's just like my body's rejecting the corn dog, so it made my nose run. I don't know what they put on it. Okay, magnetism. So, what can be, is this in the picture?
Yes.
Okay. Is it S or Z? Or as the Canadians say, Z. What is it?
I think that's right.
That's right?
Yeah.
All right, if it's wrong, it's on them. There'll be forums. Tell me how dumb I am because I can't spell magnetism. I'm sure I'll be waiting for them. Okay. What is the dangers of magnetism? I mean, we hear about magnetic fields all the time with our cell phones, electrical power cables overhead. You guys have all seen. I think maybe. I hope you've seen it. If you haven't, go look for it. But people taking neon bulbs and standing underneath the high tension power lines and they light up when they stick one in the ground. I think they stick one in the ground and the electromagnetic field will actually light the bulb. Have you ever seen that? Yeah. Pretty crazy. What can be some dangers of magnetism that could cost you thousands? And how does it come to that?
I don't know how it comes to it, but if you got a magnet strong enough and you put it next to something that's spinning, it can stop whatever's spinning and just pull it in one direction.
Right.
And if it's strong enough, it'll pull whatever it is through whatever material it's going through.
Right. So the electric motor works off of the magnetic field. We got motors that are electric motors that are very high horsepower based off of magnetism. So magnetic strength is definitely something to respect. But the magnetism I want to talk about today is something that is induced accidentally. And it's done through the most simplest of things that people don't think about. And that is welding on your vehicle. When would the average person have their car welded on?
Body shop?
Body shop? How about the exhaust system? All right. So, because my thing is engines, we're going to talk about the effect of magnetism on an engine and why it is so dangerous and why welding on your car or race car is so dangerous. And I'm not talking about dangerous to you physically, but I'm talking about dangerous to your investment. So here's a little story that basically, guys, I'm still looking for those lifters, by the way. I can't find them. All right, anyways, here's a little story that basically costed a man nearly $40,000. And it happened 2 days prior to a big giant race event. So I had built this dry sump 18-degree wheel and modified NASCAR engine. And I'm not saying this for hyping up the story, but it truly was one of the best ones that had come out of the shop. Was so proud of it, the horsepower and torque numbers. And this particular race, we had to run a box stock 390. And when I say that, a lot of times NASCAR will have different rules, and they've changed them over the years, where some of the carburetors were able to modify the booster and get a little more flow out of it, that kind of. But anyway, this was a box stock 390 job, 358 cubic inches, 12-1, and I had the best of the best in this engine. This particular driver was by far one of my favorites to work with. One of the hardest working guys. He would always qualify in the top 5, but his deal was his race setup was so good. And I mean, I could depend on him. If he was 10th halfway through the race, you could depend on him knocking on the back of the guy leading the race before it was over with. And he just worked his butt off, and we won a lot of races together, won some championships together. And this was one of the engines I was so proud of. So 2 days prior to this big race event, he decides to change his car setup, and he went from the smaller coilover shocks, he went to a different type of spring all the way around the car. He went to a spring that changed. There were compound springs, so they'll change spring rates as you compress them. It was not like just a constant addition, a constant growth in spring pressure applied to the suspension. These particular types of springs would change the spring rate as you compressed them. And it was something new at that time. It was a new technology, and when you do that, you had to go to a different sway bar. So the sway bar he had, I don't remember now, so don't hold me to this. I want to say it was either like an 1.5 or 2 inch front sway bar. And if you don't know what a Whelen modified sway bar looks like, it's really not a sway bar, it's a torsion bar. It was a torsion bar type deal. That's what it was. Now I remember. We went to a torsion style sway bar system. And guys, the sway bar he put in this thing, or the torsion bar he put in the front of this car, looked like it was 3 inches around. I mean, it was massive. So to do that, he had to bore a hole through the front horn of the car, put in these tubes. It was a whole kit that he got from Troyer. So it was a Troyer chassis. And of course our cars were first class. I mean, they were beautiful cars, they were top notch, and everything's powder coated. I mean, just, nice, gorgeous stuff. Well, the guy I'm talking about was not a professional welder, and he made a very, very, very bad mistake. Expensive mistake. First of all, you have to understand how electricity works. Okay? In order for a welder to actually weld, it has to have a good ground. Okay? And this is why I'm making this video. This particular person took his grounding cable to the welder and clamped it on the frame. And I don't know where on the frame he clamped it to because I wasn't there. But he clamped it on the frame and commences to welding, and it took him almost 5 hours to get all this done and trigged out and get all the suspension back square and everything. It was a nice looking job. That evening, he calls me on the phone and says, "Hey man, what are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm getting ready to head to the house." He says, "Dude, can you please come over? We got problems." I said, "What do you mean we got problems?" He goes, "Man, I fired this engine up and it's squeaking." What do you mean it's squeaking? He says, "It literally sounds like a squeaky door hinge as it's running." I said, "Okay, I'll be right there." So it was a good 40-minute drive. I get in the car and I'm buzzing down the road, get to the place. That's all right, fire it up. So we fired up, and sure enough, it was. I'm like, holy crap, what is going on? So I started investigating. First thing I did was pull the Oberg filter off, because dry sump system. Don't see anything. And he was very good customer, meaning he took care of his stuff. He was very cautious. He kept the oil changed. He kept, top notch. The guy you want as a customer. So he didn't like let it run just like, oh, it's squeaking, I don't know why. He heard the squeak and he cut it off immediately. So we got there, we checked it out, nothing in the Oberg filter and all that, and cranked it up, and sure enough, it's squeaking. Oh my goodness, what is this noise? I've never heard nothing like it in my life. To this day, since or after. I pull the valve covers off. And I'm looking, and I start somewhere about the middle, I don't know, number cylinders 3 or 5, I look. Now I'm running trend push rods in this engine. They were 7/16, so, and they were chrome moly. They didn't have no powder coat on them. And don't open that. Didn't have no powder coat on them. Hang on one second. Sorry, we had a moron come to the door. Anyways, I pull the valve covers off and I look at cylinders. As I'm looking through everything, the push rods, they were chrome moly. They didn't have any black on them, so they were, a shiny steel color. I noticed at the top of one of the push rods, it had this bluish color to it. I thought, what is that? Now remember, this is one of my best engines at the time. It was off the dyno, about 3 or 4 days prior. So it had no race on it yet. It probably had about 7 or 8 pulls on the dyno. That was it. And I went through the valves before I gave them the engine, so I know how everything looked. I'm looking at cylinder number 3, push rod, and I noticed there's a blue color to one of the tops. And it has a 5/16 ball style. So your push rod will have like this ball. And then these were 7/16, so they came way down like this. And then they, And I noticed up in here there was this coloration. Can y'all see that on the camera? There was this coloration because you got a rocker arm cup. So the cup of the rocker arm would be like this. And then, of course, you have your T&D rockers, the whole 9. So I saw this blue coloration. I thought, well, what is that? So I rotate the engine over and get all the rocker arms up on lash, and I would start taking off all the rocker arms. And as I'm removing them, I start seeing push rods with this bluish arc to the top of the push rods. And then I touch it with my finger, and it's sharp and jaggedy. Now understand that the push rods, these springs, I want to say were 280 on the seat and like almost 800 pounds open spring pressure. And you don't have misshapen push rods. You got this thing had oiler spraying on everything up top. There is no reason there should have been a squeak. This thing had to be perfectly polished so that it wouldn't produce metal shavings, right? Because you're talking about an enormous amount of pressure on that right there. So I feel it with my finger and it's jagged. Oh my gosh, what is going on? So I start pulling all of them off, and there's about 5, I think it was 5. Every one that had where the cam on that particular cylinder, every one of the rock arms that was on lash, meaning there was no pressure on the push rod, had arced. And I look at the guy, I say, man, dude, what have you done? He goes, man, I just put this torsion bar, sway bar system in, and I went to crank it. I said, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, I know exactly what's happened. He grounded the welder a couple feet away from his work, number one. Number two, he just clamped it onto the frame. What's the frame? Powder coated. And that welder sent voltage through that engine block from where he was welding to the ground cable. It's got to find the ground cable in order to work. And it passed through the engine block. And just like a spark plug, anywhere there was an air gap, it shot sparks. And I thought, dude, I have just opened a can of worms right here. The squeaking was the push rod ball grinding in the cup of the rocker arm. And it gets worse. I said, dude, okay, we've got to take this motor out right now, this engine out, sorry, and go ahead and get the backup ready because you can't run this. So, aside from being so mad you could cook eggs on my head, I just bit my tongue, didn't say anything, and he's a great guy. It was just, he wasn't thinking or didn't know or both. He knows now. So I take this engine home. We get to tearing it apart. Of course, this is going to be all night for me. And at the time, my oldest son, who was, when I say my oldest son, I had other people, but he was right there in my hip pocket. We get to tearing this thing apart, and let me tell you what all it done. There was 3 connecting rods where it arced on the crank. This is a $5,000 Bryant crankshaft. I was running a roller bearing front cam hub. So the camshaft, when you run a belt drive, you have an option of running shims or all kinds of little things there. Well, my cams ran on roller bearings in the block, and the front hub, where the front timing pulley went, also was roller bearings. So there was no part of that cam touching the block at any point. Everything was roller bearings. The fore and aft bushing was roller bearings. The cam journal bearings were roller bearings, and it arced in every one of them. So we have push rod ends that are burnt. We have rod main bearings that are burnt, just a couple. We have all the cam bearings that are burnt. And the squeaky noise was metal to metal grinding in this $40-something thousand engine that was brand spanking new off the dyno. I had pictures in my other phone. This was many years ago. This was back probably 2009 when this happened. And I cannot find them. But I had pictures, and it was clear as day. And through the years, I tell every customer now, when you get an engine from me, that when you go, and I'm going to tell you another real quick story. You'll go to these exhaust shops, and they're not engine builders. They're not machinists. Heck, they're not even technicians. They're exhaust installers or exhaust makers. And I see them time and time again, and this is why I'm making this video, because you got to stop this before it happens. I see time and time again, they'll be on an engine here. So this is an engine. I'm trying to think of something. There we go. This will be your back of your block, and then the manifold's here, and here comes your dual exhaust. Whether it's headers or dual exhaust or just manifolds, it don't matter. But they will ground over here on this one, going to the welder, and they'll be welding over here. Can you see that on camera? They're welding on this side with their ground on this side. What does it have to pass through to get to the welder? The whole entire engine. And if there's an air gap, guess what can happen? It can arc inside of your engine and take years off its life, possibly ruin it right then and there. Now, that's just the dangers of welding. The arcing part, I mean. The arcing part, that's just one danger. The other danger is anytime you pass electric current through something, you stand a risk of magnetizing it. I've seen metal get magnetized from hitting it with a hammer. Anybody ever seen that or heard of that? You can take a crank or an engine block or a set of iron heads and magnaflux them and check them, and you just induce possible magnetism into that part. Now, what happens if your crank gathers metal shavings while it's operating? That can't be a good thing, can it? Anytime you get exhaust done on your car or race car or whatever it is, I'm telling you guys, I am so OCD about this subject right here. I make people, let me erase this real fast. If I'm doing it myself or if I'm hiring a guy to do it, let's say that I'm welding something on the engine, it don't matter what it is, but I'm welding right here, okay? Guess where Mr. Salter's grounds is going to be? Right there. Because welders are taught in school that they'll ground the work table and then put their part on the table and just start welding. They don't actually ground the part half the time. I've seen them do it many, 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 many times. They got a big steel table, they'll ground the metal table and sit their part up there and start working on it because they're just grounding through the table. That's fine when you're doing massive jobs that aren't precision. Like for example, if you're going to do some pipe fitting or you're going to make a steel frame, that is not the same care as an automotive engine. Because I don't give 2 cents if you magnetize a steel structure. I don't care to even know about what happens if you magnetize a steel building. I don't care. That's for them people to figure out. But this engine stuff is my business. And when you get something welding on an engine, you better be grounded right there at the work. Because I don't want to pass a voltage through the entire part. On top of, it will weld actually a whole lot better when you do. So if you go to an exhaust shop and you see him, he's got one of those little homemade hangers. First of all, the exhaust system that he's going to be welding on is a lot of times they're aluminized, which means it's got a coating on it. If you don't grind through that coating, you don't have a good conductivity. Although welders, the exhaust people that are good, they can still make it work. That's number one, you're trying to ground through some dirty pipe. But number two, when I hook my ground on the right side of the engine and I'm welding on the left side, I'm passing that voltage through every single engine part in the block. And I have 2 problems. I can arc stuff in there and damage all my components that I just mentioned earlier, or I can magnetize the engine, and it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing. Don't allow anyone to weld on your car or your truck or your race car or anything you care about unless they are grounded directly beside where they're working. And make sure you grind off any kind of paint, any kind of powder coat. Make sure you make them do it. Is it a little extra effort? Yes, but unless you just got thousands of dollars to throw away at a whim, you better do it. The second thing is people with computer electronic fuel injection or direct fuel injection or any kind of computers that are in the car and you're welding recklessly. And I'm going to tell you, if you're grounding on the right and welding on the left, that's what I call reckless welding. And a lot of welders just aren't aware of it. So I'm not trying to bash on welders. I mean, I weld too. But a lot of welders are just not aware of it. They're good at welding. They're not technicians. You understand the difference? So you have to educate them. But if you got an ECM and a computer and wiring harness and the guy's recklessly welding on your car, you stand a chance of that car never starting again. There are precautions that must be taken when you weld on a vehicle. And if I'm going to weld on a vehicle, especially a newer one or a computer controlled or I'm running an MSD ignition system, one of the things I do is I disconnect my grounds from my batteries. I will unplug my MSD box completely. Because one mishap will send voltage through something and blow it out. These are little integrated circuit boards that are not designed to handle that kind of voltage and current. What kind of voltage does your car spit out, right? 12.6 to 12.8 battery voltage and up to 14.8 out of the alternator. So your car runs on about 14 volts of electricity. It doesn't need thousands of volts shot through it. Or even if it's just a voltage spike, you can blow computers. So if you ever weld on somebody's car, unplug, unhook the battery, and I always unhook my MSD stuff so that I don't risk popping integrated circuit boards or blowing out modules. And never, and I mean never, weld with your ground on the other side. If you're welding on a vehicle, ground directly beside your work. It might be a little aggravating, but it could save your vehicle in the long run. It could save your engine in the long run. Everybody understand that? Now, one of the things we do at my shop is whenever I'm doing a build, and this is just an old crank here. Let's see. I want to show you a good way to get rid of any magnetism in it. So we'll turn the phone here. There we go. I have this little box, and you can buy this at Goodson. Okay? This is a demagnetizer. I turn it on, and if there's anything that's magnetized, I pass it across it, and it messes up the north and south poles of any magnetism. So it scrambles them, because the way you make a magnet is you align them. And I'm just passing, take a connecting rod, go over it, crankshaft, same thing. I'll go over the crank and make sure that I don't have any kind of magnetism in the crankshaft or connecting rods or anything like that. Now, there are machine shops out there, especially some of the older school places, that have a machine just to demagnetize blocks. And a lot of the diesel shops will do that. It's a pretty dang big machine. I've seen it, because obviously diesel engines are pretty large. There's a company called Piedmont Ford in Greensboro, North Carolina, and they have one of these machines, and I've actually saw it. Now, the reason I know about that shop is because one of the guys that ported all of Richard Petty's heads retired from Petty and worked there because he just got bored, and he did all the head work on the diesels there. He's a friend of mine. He's long since retired there now, but so this little tool right here and some good old grounding common sense can save you a lot of money and save you heartache with a customer if you happen to be fixing something for him and you need to weld and you go carelessly trying to ground through paint, trying to ground through powder coat, run your ground wire on the other side of the engine and you're welding over here. Yeah, not smart, guys. Not smart. Ground on a car, ground directly beside your work. Make sure it's clean to the metal on your ground. Okay, that is just one precaution you can take. Will it completely stop it? No. But it's a really, really good chance that all the passing the electrons through the parts, it's searching for ground. So if you ground right where you're working is about a 98% chance it's going to stop right there. But if you ground on the right bank and weld on the left, there's a 100% chance you're going to pass voltage through that block and possible cause damage like what I talked about earlier. Does that make sense? Very, very good. All right. Well, I see we got some parts in. Thank y'all for joining us. And let's take a break.